Welcome to the Zeducation podcast, where it's all about helping people and organizations unleash their greatness. The Zeducation podcast features lively discussions.
When they share it, you see that they're beginning to feel empowered.
My heart, it's full of pride for me to be at Tamaiti Samoa.
You don't necessarily need a degree these days. There's so many pathways to success.
Welcome to the Zeducation podcast. Welcome to the Zeducation podcast, where it's all about helping you win both personally and professionally. Today, we are thrilled to have Dr. Radilaite Cammock joining us. Dr. Cammock's journey started in Fiji before she moved to New Zealand, where her passion for public health took root. With both a master's and a doctorate in public health from the University of Otago, she brings a wealth of knowledge shaped by her upbringing in diverse cultural settings. Currently a senior lecturer and a deputy dean at Auckland University of Technology, Dr. Cammock is making a significant impact by addressing Pacific health issues and empowering Pacific youth. Her research spans topics such as sexual and reproductive health and non-communicable diseases and food systems, all focused on Pacific population. In today's episode, we'll dive into her inspiring journey and the challenges she's overcome and the transformative power of education and culture in shaping better health outcomes. Stay tuned for insights on how we can all learn from her experience to make positive changes in our lives and communities. Dr. Cammock, thank you for coming on to the Zeducation podcast today. Kind of get things going here. We want to start off with the icebreaker question.
Yes.
So what is something interesting about yourself that not many people know about you?
Well, I don't know if this is a cool thing that's interesting about me, but I used to play the cello when I was in high school. I learned how to play it. I don't know how to play it anymore, but, you know, it's one thing that I think is interesting about me that I sometimes share with people.
I love it. Well, you just got to try things, right?
Yeah. I liked to play the guitar, and I sort of learned classical guitar, so not really around the bonfire kind of guitar, but just, classical one. And then there was an option to do the cello, and so I decided to do it. And it was a bit different, but it felt like the same instrument, just bigger. But it never went anywhere. So, I don't know how to play it now, but I did learn when I was in high school.
And it is definitely interesting. I love that. Are you a singer, by the way? Do you sing?
I sing.
Would you like to demo for us?
No. But,
okay.
I can hold a tune, but I'm not an artist or anything. So I love music, though. So I sometimes think I can sing, but no, I wouldn't want to do it in front of anyone. So
you'll never know. One day. But hey, thank you so much again for just coming onto the show. You have an awesome story. You're in this space where you're contributing to public health, especially from an academic and research point of view, which is awesome because there's not many Pacifica who are in this space. So we're keen to kind of learn more about your journey and how you got into the space. But let's go to the beginning. Your family's come from Fiji to New Zealand, and then tell us about that, and then how you eventually ended up in public health.
Yeah, so where do I start? My family migrated to New Zealand when I was about 9, and so we migrated to Hamilton. And that's where I went to high school. I went to primary, intermediate, and high school in Hamilton. And I come from a family of 11, and I'm one of the younger ones. So I have 2 younger brothers, and then an older brother, and then sisters, 2 older brothers and then sisters. So it's I come from a really big family, and one of the main drivers for us coming to New Zealand was educational opportunities. And so my parents raised us with very strict sort of practices around studying, and we really had to push ourselves and apply ourselves, and all of us did that. So coming to New Zealand, going through high school and then eventually university, there was always this expectation that we would go to university, that we would make something of ourselves. And so that's been the driver, I think, for myself and my siblings, is pushing to sort of make our lives and our family lives better than what we experienced. And so that's kind of led me to be in this space, I guess, to be in higher education, to pursue a PhD, and I'm still at a university, but still pushing and still working hard. My public health kind of journey started when I was in my undergrad. So I went to Otago to study. And that was an awesome experience, actually, because, coming from a big family, you're suddenly by yourself and you're suddenly having to make decisions about prioritizing your study. Your parents are not there anymore. And I think because we grew up in quite a strict environment where education was, our main focus, it wasn't hard for me to sort of apply the same thing in a university setting. I was just by myself now, but education was why I was there. I still had to study. I still had to do those things. And I come from, a lot of my family are in the health industry, are health professionals. And so health was always something that I thought of myself doing once I finished high school. And I remember taking an undergraduate paper in health policy. And I was on track to sort of do a postgrad honours in, anatomy or something in a lab. And I remember taking this course and thinking, actually, this is so interesting. And we were talking about political kind of topics around health and sort of equity and that kind, those kind of discussions. And I just loved that paper. So that got me aware of actually public health and kind of the profession or the space that you could go into, and when it was time for postgrad, I did a postgraduate diploma in public health, and it was all public health from there. So I do find that now that I am in public health, it's a really great space for me because it aligns well with my interests. I'm still involved with health, but I also get to look at health issues in a broader context, one that actually influences people's lives out there in the community on so many different levels: policy level, health system level, primary care level, community level. And as I was mentioning, before, we came from Fiji, and my father was a journalist. He's retired now, but he was also a political analyst. So he had a lot of opinions about, the government and how they were running things. And we grew up around that. And so public health kind of offers me a space where I can sort of get involved in those types of discourses, but also, focusing on health and focusing on addressing inequity and social justice and all of those things. So it's a place where I have found myself. I never started university thinking I would do public health, but I'm definitely enjoying being in this space, and I love my work. So, I think it's a really good match for me.
I love it. What I love about that journey is obviously your parents raised you and drilled into you guys the importance of education for good reasons. Even my parents were the same. And look where it's got you today. And you've discovered a passion. And you're in a place that you love, which is, you're contributing to public health from academic research. And what I love about this, especially from a political environment, is government especially rely on research to make informed decisions, right? Because a lot of that research, a lot of the case studies or pilots have been done with sample groups that are, I guess, decent enough size to give an insight or indication around if we make this decision as a government, the kind of impact it will have on the community. Tell us about, in public health, which areas interest you the most and why?
That's a really good question because public health is really broad. I'm particularly interested at the moment in Pacific, the experiences of our Pacifica people, only because I see it, in my own family, but also in my community. The other part of public health that I think is really interesting to me is how we address systems or how we work with systems to address health outcomes, and particularly when we're talking about inequity, what is it about our systems that are reinforcing some of these barriers that our vulnerable groups are having to experience. And for me, public health gives me that the scope to look at all of those things and all of the factors that might be influencing those dynamics within, how someone might be experiencing the health system. So that is very interesting to me. Another part of it that I think I get to delve into a little bit with my teaching as well as my research is some of the ideology behind the way decision makers make decisions. We teach, and I work at AUT, so we teach a course on ideology behind health systems, and you can see how politicians might frame issues or might target particular issues over another because of a particular ideology that they agree with or that they're accustomed to. And so as a public health researcher, you can really sort of provide that context behind why some decisions are made the way they are, and maybe warn against, some thinking or some ideology that could lead to worse outcomes for, our Pacifica people, but also vulnerable groups.
It's interesting that you bring that up, especially around the different ideologies that I guess political leaders might have, and why they make those decisions, and I guess the ripple effect of those decisions on the community. I guess, do you feel like, in your honest opinion, in the past couple of years, that the government, especially their decisions around public health and that, what impact you've seen, or good or bad?
Oh, there's a lot of ways to slice, that sort of issue. From a health system kind of point of view, we've had, the Labour government and the new reforms that they introduced. Now we have a new kind of coalition government that has reversed some of that. So from a health systems point of view, and I guess the sustainability of the health system moving forward, that sort of chopping and changing, is not very good in terms of sustainability, but also our people on the ground kind of understanding what is available to them. It does nothing to address barriers. And so those decisions made by politicians has a ripple effect. And I think that some of the changes, I think, need to be given more time. I think we need more time with some of these changes. But then again, it's really tricky with our political system to sort of see something through when the cycle is only 3 years, I think. So again, it's very different. I also think that from a Pacific Health point of view, some of the attention that we received around equity is being lost because of this change. And I had a conversation the other day about equity and what that means, and the changing of the language now to need, because everyone has need, but when it comes to equity, it's only a few people or a group of people. But in my view, equity is really about need. We are addressing need, and equity is a way that we're able to prioritize that need to a group that needs it the most, and so I think sometimes there's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of confusion, and at the end of the day, the people that, the people that are disadvantaged the most are the ones that have been disadvantaged for, a few political cycles already. So, I do think we need to decide on one thing, and then just stick with it for as long as we can, and not be driven by different groups coming in and out. But whether that will happen, I don't know. But
yeah, I mean, this there's a pro and con to almost everything, eh? And I think if we compare that to China, and correct me if I'm wrong, but China, their governments, obviously they run differently, but they have like 100-year strategy, for example. And, regardless of the change in leadership, the strategy is kind of like already set in motion, right? It's already in place. Whereas, like you said, in New Zealand, 3-4 years changes, chop and changes. Like, are we really giving these initiatives or these changes enough time to really see an impact?
Yeah.
Right. And is 3-4 years long enough to see those changes? But you mentioned inequity, obviously. What are some inequity that you're seeing in public health, especially for Pacifica?
So one of the areas that I focus on in terms of my research is around NCDs, and particularly obesity. And one of the issues with our Pacifica is that our rates are very, quite poor compared to non-Pacifica. And that's kind of getting worse as well. So one of the areas that we're looking at is, instead of focusing on these statistics, which we should be, we also need to be focusing on solutions. What are some solutions to addressing these things? And there are a lot of risk factors, and there are a lot of, areas that we can address clinically around these things. But a lot of things around obesity have to do with lifestyle changes, and also the environment that our Pacifica people are in. So the work we've been doing is looking at our food environments and looking at how we can harness some positive, things that are happening in our community and amplify that, because there are some positive things. Our traditional diets were very healthy compared to what they are now. And I think some of that is coming back when we look at, our older generations. They're now trying to eat healthier, probably because all of their health issues, but they are trying to introduce things that are more healthier. And communicating that information down to the generation below them, let's harness this knowledge and let's try to support the communication of that knowledge down to other generations, so that we don't perpetuate, our younger people getting through and becoming, obese and then having NCDs. So we need to work out what is something that we can do in our own communities that people are already doing, and amplifying that and providing, more support around that. And so we've been working with, in our team, looking at concepts like Food Haven. I don't know if I've spoken to you about this before, but maybe with Sandra, around Food Haven, that is defined as spaces where our Pacifica people have access to healthy food, but in a way that is mana enhancing and is empowering. Because sometimes when we go to places and we see a salad, we're just like, I don't want to eat that. Why would I? Or, we see some of the words of these new trends and things, and it's like so foreign to us. So a food haven is a space where we have maybe our traditional food that is prepared for us, that doesn't have all the other additives and everything in it, but that we have access to, we are familiar with, and that also, kind of reinforces who we are as people, because our habits represent who we are. And if we practice our Pacific culture, that is who we are. So why not, bring our food into that sort of, into that kind of behavior. And it happens. I'm not saying this is new. It happens in our community, but it's just not part of the conversation around obesity prevention. So that's the research that we're doing, is how do we bring some of these things that are working, the knowledge that we have around farming and all of that, into the conversation around obesity, and then see how systems, services, community providers can get around that and actually support that. Because I think at the moment, I think the area is, we're not doing enough to address it, and it's not actually being addressed. So this is sort of our contribution to that kind of discussion. And there are other things, but that's sort of one thing that comes to mind.
Yeah, there's a lot of variables when it comes to, I guess, obesity.
Yeah.
And I think you've mentioned a few around there. I mean, tapping back into our cultural knowledge and values and living with that and applying that, especially in the world that we live in the Western type of society. But, if you could you've mentioned a few solutions already, but if you could wave a magic wand and make some changes in this public health, whether it be from government, community, provider point of view, what changes would you like to see?
I think in terms of public health, there are many factors that influence the decision making of people around health. So we often talk about social determinants of health and how different factors like education, income, all of these things factor in to mental health, to all sorts of different areas of health. And so what I think we need to do is we need to firstly look at issues from that sort of multi-dimensional space. So just fixing something in the hospital doesn't really fix it. They go home to an environment that may be reinforcing, some of these issues. I think we also need to fix our primary health care. So primary health care are our services closer to where we live at home. So they are the GP up the road. They could also be, a health service that's out of the community centre or the marae. Like it's fixing that up and investing more in those services that are closer to home that people will mostly access compared to, pooling resources out of those places. So I think those two things is probably what I think we as a Pacifica people need. We need a functioning primary health care, and we need, when we go to the doctor or when, an issue comes to us, that the support is not just one-dimensional, that there are other sort of services that are available that are communicating, that can address, not just our needs, but also the impact that it might have on our family, because we are communal in nature, and so whatever affects us affects the whole family.
That's so true. Thank you so much, Ite. Our audience loves case studies and examples. Do you have an example or a case study that you can talk to about something good that's actually working in the public health sector, especially for our Pacifica?
If I pull on an example that I think for Pacific that worked, I think it would be through COVID, when our rates went really high, and that was because, everybody worked together. We had Pacific providers, we had incentives to come in, get tested or come and get the vaccine, and we were leading that. And I think that's a really great example of what we can do when our Pacific people are involved, and also when we have the resources to do that, because we needed our rates to go high so that the rest of the country, could kind of follow suit. So I think that's been a really good example of in the public sort of a public initiative rollout of vaccination, that we had our Pacific people leading it, but also it was in the community that we had a lot of those services that our people could access.
Wow, that's a great example. And I mean, obviously, I saw it myself. I'm in that Pacifica group there, and it was just amazing to see people like the Māori, culture, people coming together, the marae setting all those stations up, Pacifica, like churches and people coming together, the community. It was just awesome. You could see how community, or that value of community that Pacifica have, is a way that we like to, I guess, find and implement solutions. There's a very community-oriented approaches.
Yes.
Any initiative, community-led, is very effective. Would you say?
Yeah. And I remember we went up to get our vaccines, and I remember seeing a Māori or Pacifica young person like directing us, and I had, my girls in the car, and it made it feel exciting. It made it feel, and I was so impressed with them. Like, I just thought this is what our youth can do. This is the sort of support that we can bring around it, and we're involving our young people. And I think that's another area for us as a Pacific cohort, but also just in general, is our young people. We need to bring them in because they're the future. And the projects, all the different projects that we have a youth focus. And our young people also tell us the truth. They will say, oh, that's not going to work. That's not very cool. And so we're able to sort of adjust as well. So, yeah, I think our community, when we say community, it's not just, one group. It's a lot of different groups, but also our young people are really important.
Oh, that's a powerful. I love that. I just get the goosebumps as I was hearing that. I want to come back to your journey in education and as an academic. I mean, just sitting here listening, you've got so much passion and knowledge in this space, right? It's because you've spent a lot of time, but also because you're in a position where you can actually influence and do research that influence change or help influence change. But recently I've heard some crazy stats, and I can't remember the actual percentage. But a lot of Pacifica, especially, who are coming into education, who don't complete education. They get into it, but they don't finish it for all sorts of reasons, right? I guess from your personal experience, you probably would have encountered some challenges, but you've got to in a PhD. Like a lot of Pacifica, even myself, aspire for that, right? But then at the same time, it's not easy. Like a lot of them struggle. I want to hear your thoughts around some of the challenges that some Pacifica might have as they go through this educational journey. But what's some advice around that? And why should we see more Pacifica in academic research?
That's a great question. And I just want to say, even though I have got a PhD, it's still hard. It's still hard to be doing it, be furthering. And once you get a PhD, that's not the end. Like there's more after that. But sorry. But what I would say is, I grew up never thinking the PhD was an option. I knew I was going to go to university. I just didn't know that I would then do a PhD. And I didn't really find out about the option of a PhD until I got to university. So that was something that I also thought, oh, could I even do that? Would that even be possible? What do I have to do to get there? And often it's just about putting one foot in front of the other. I got some advice from my sister. I have a lot of sisters, so she won't know which one it is. But one thing she said to me is, when you start something, you finish it. So even if you're not happy in your last year with your degree or whatever it is, finish it. And that's something that I've always kept at the back of my mind, is if you start a degree, if you start doing something on a pathway, and there's no possible way you could off ramp it into another degree, finish what you start, because all of those qualifications, all of those papers stack up. They all work towards something, whether it's letting you then qualify for another program, or whether it qualifies you for work experience. All of the education that you gain is useful, and you want to have a piece of paper after it. Like it sounds a little bit kind of tokenistic, but there's something that you can show. Like going to university just to learn is great, but you want to show something afterwards. And I think that's one of the things, that when you finish a degree, you have something to show for it. Even if it's not in the area that you want to be in, if you end up, working in marketing or something and you've got a science degree, that's another level that another marketing, employee doesn't have. You've got a science background as well as all the other marketing qualifications that you need. So my first advice would be to finish what you start. The second thing is that it is a journey. So you're not going to be an expert. The journey is what you're signing up for. So, I spent 11 years studying to get to my PhD, and I never thought I would do 11 years. And I think my mum is also like, why? I remember when I was doing my master's and my PhD, she was like, how long are you going to be at university? But it was definitely a journey, and a lot of the time, I finished one degree, I started another degree, I finished that degree, and then the other options opened up, and then I did another, and then I finished that, and then I got a scholarship to do a PhD. But I would have never been there if I didn't finish those things, and also if I didn't think of that finishing as the end. It was always, what is next? What's the next part of the journey? What else do I have to do? So finishing, realizing that everything is part of the journey. I will say that the PhD was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. And when it comes to education, out of all the degrees, the PhD was the hardest. And I think the PhD is also something that you don't just learn about in a book. When you do a PhD, you're really doing research for health anyway. And so you're having to sort of really look inside yourself at what you bring, what is my contribution. And sometimes when you're reading out of a textbook, you're just regurgitating what you're reading. Whereas when you're doing research and you're doing a PhD, you're reading, but also you're thinking, you're critiquing, and then you're producing something that is original and authentic. And that takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of failures, It takes a lot of working with people and relying on different people, especially for your research. And it can be one where you're up and down a lot. And so my master's was a little bit easier than it was way easier than my PhD. So I think when I got into that PhD frame, I was like, okay, this is it. But now being on the other side of that training has now made the other side easier. So when I do my work, it's not like the PhD. It's still difficult, it's still challenging, but I'm thinking it would have been a lot worse if I didn't go through that experience as a student, as a doctoral student. So it's definitely something I'm grateful for. And, as a student, when you're doing postgraduate, and I know this for a lot of students that I have, but also students I know of, is that their life doesn't stop. I got married when I started my PhD, and then I had my 2 babies when I was doing my PhD. So your life doesn't stop. And, now being on the other side of it, I can definitely, say that you can do it. You can do it and live your life as well. It just might take longer, but it's definitely possible. And if I can do it, then anyone can do it. And my PhD was in 2 countries. It was in Fiji and New Zealand. And it was mixed method. It was, different methods as well. So it was definitely an ambitious PhD, but it was one that allowed me to kind of go back to who I was as a Fijian, as an Itoke woman, but also a mother, and a Pacifica person here in Aotearoa. So it really prepared me for all these things I'm doing now. And you own that work. That work is yours. Like when I see the articles I've written from my PhD, they're some of my most, they may not be in high impact factor journals, they may not be in the best journals, but they mean the most to me because I know the story behind the story. And, you'll have that on your journey. But I would encourage, if anyone is thinking about a PhD, it's not just something about knowledge. It's also about who you are and what you contribute, to knowledge, but also to your community. And when you're involved in academia, you get to put what you think on paper and publish it, and I often think, my students might be my legacy, in my work, but it's actually my intellectual, thinking and what I put out there that will still be here when I die. Like that is the stuff about my job that I think is really great, is whatever I write will still be here. If people can still access it, it will still be here. And that represents who I am. And as a Pacifica people, we're able to bring who we are as Pacifica people into our academic work. Like I've talked a lot about in my research, kind of reclaiming my Fijian identity, having not lived in Fiji for, permanently since I was 9, the research has really taken me back and sort of made me really understand my language better, but also what that means in terms of health, sort of the application of that. And that strengthens my identity as an Itoke academic, researcher, and Pacifica person here in Aotearoa.
That's powerful. There was just so much there that I believe that our listeners are going to get a lot of value from this. I think in particular, obviously your sister, awesome advice, be a finisher. Like, all of us are great at starting things, but not all of us finish. Yeah. But I think that's some great advice from your sister there. And you've taken that advice with you even up to today. But I think I like what you said around, look, this life in education and university doesn't mean that it's this or the other. Like you can still live your life, you can still get married, you can still do this, right? Like you said. But I think there's this confusion around, it's either a job or this, or it's either marriage or this, or marriage comes after, no, you could still do a little bit of that. You can still live your life. Like this is a part of it. It's not this or the other. But also, I really love that concept around, authentic work. You're kind of like creating a legacy. Like you said, we all die, we all pass on, but you're leaving something behind that's going to benefit, hopefully, generations.
Yeah.
Right. Obviously, it's great because we want a legacy for our family. We want our last name to be remembered in a good way. But at the same time, you want to leave a legacy that people can remember, but actually has a positive impact. Who knows? 50 years from now, people are going to look back and be like, Ita did the research. Dr. Cammock did the research. Let's go back there. Like, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. Let's go back there. You just never know. Right?
No, and with research, you don't find out all the answers either. So I'm really big on, we've done some work, but it's not all of it. We now need other people to come and, push it forward. So, people may look back on some of the work we've done and think the answer is there. It might be, but the context is going to be different. And so we constantly need Pacific, students, researchers, academics to get into this space, because we need to do so much more with our methodologies, with our issues, with our health issues, with our approaches that we use, that we're not going to be able to answer all in this generation. So there is always knowledge that we need to bring. There is always experience that we need to bring. And the Pacific is so diverse. We have our ethnic differences. We also have generational differences. We have the diaspora now, so we have Pacific people all over the world with their own unique experiences. So all of those perspectives need to be captured. Like, who's going to do that but us? And so I'm talking about my experience as an Itaukei person and living in Fiji and in the, specific areas that I'm looking at with health, but there are way more, and there is so much more to do, that there's just not enough of us. So I'm always excited to bring on Pacific, students on my projects. I'm a big advocate for them to, get that experience. But also when I see students in my classes or, who are doing research degrees, it's amazing to see their ideas, to kind of be supportive of whatever I can be supportive of and guide them, in a way that will fulfill what they want out of it, but also address some of the issues that we have in our community. So it's a really rewarding space that I find myself in.
Yeah, you're right. You're right about that around research. It's finding, I guess, insights and, I guess, some answers, but not all the answers. But you hope, you've got to look at researchers that way as like, it's a building block. Like someone will come, pick it up and add on it. And I love that. And I think, especially when you're bringing it back to Pacifica values, the whole generational, it's like we want to do the best that we can now so that the future looks bright for the next generation,
Yeah.
and then they can do better, and there's a
Yeah.
just carries on. I love that. This is a selfish question.
Yes.
But what's the best research that you've ever come across that's just made you go, wow, and why? There's got to be at least one that you've come across. I mean, I guess as a researcher, you come across a lot.
Yeah,
You're like,
I
changes every
do,
time.
I do.
But one of recently.
One recently. Let me think about this one. Oh. I mean, I'd like to share sort of a methodology research because, research around methodology because it's one that, as a Fijian person, I rely on a lot. And that is research around Vanua and Vanua research methodology by Professor Unaisi Nombombamba, who's the VC of FNU, at the moment. And it was part of a doctoral research, but that whole methodology that she used is something I rely on a lot when I talk about my research and the way that, we might work with our communities. So I think of that work, like if she didn't do that, we would have to work, we'd have to start from scratch and create something like that or write about something like that to guide us.
Can you tell us about that methodology?
So Vanua, her Vanua framework is based on the concept of Vanua in indigenous Fijian culture. And Vanua in Fijian means land, but it also means the sort of cultural practices that are associated with the land. And that involves the values, that involves, hierarchy, respect, all of these things. And she outlines 8 processes that a researcher should undertake when doing research with communities in Fiji or in the village in Fiji. And so those processes, they highlight really key concepts that as a researcher you need to be aware of when you're wanting to maybe interview or you're wanting to do focus groups or even wanting to approach the topic. Things like asking permission to enter the village, those kinds of processes she outlines and talks about them in the Fijian context with Fijian terms and practices. And that I had never seen or read before when I was doing my PhD or, even some of the work that I do now. There's a lot more written about it now, but that to me is something that we often go back to. But it was published, it was published as well, or you're able to access it. And so a lot of the Fijians or Itoke that do research now in those communities will refer to what Professor Naisi had written about. And we have written a little bit now about Talanoa and about the Fijian research paradigm and what that looks like, what areas you need to think about, what values you need to practice, and particularly for those of us Fijians that live in the diaspora. They don't live in a village anymore, we live somewhere else, but we still hold on to those values. What does that look like in a different landscape? How do we practice that process of, asking for permission and all of that? If we want to be true to ourselves as Itauke, but also do it properly in a community, in a Fijian community. And so if it wasn't for that work, we wouldn't really have that foundation to sort of discuss things theoretically for an academic audience. So that's, I think, for me, one of the most important pieces of research that I've come across for just being a Fijian, an Itoke academic. And so, it's one thing that comes to mind that I use a lot in my work.
That's powerful. I love that example. Thank you for sharing that, because you're embedding cultural values into this. Yeah, I mean, like, it's not normal for Pacifica to go, I want to go do a research, I'm going to use this framework, you gather, do case studies and stuff. But now, when I hear that, actually you're doing it in a Pacifica way.
Yeah.
You do research in a Pacifica way, using that methodology.
Yeah.
And that just makes sense. it just, I guess, for me, gives me hope knowing that we can apply our cultural values no matter where we go. No matter what profession we're in, no matter what space we're in. Like, that's powerful. I think, well, I guess just as we're drawing close to the end of the podcast, and, you know, I guess one of my final questions is, what's your advice around bringing your cultural values, whether it's in education or whether it's in your profession, and why would that be important for Pacifica?
Bringing your cultural values into education is really, I think, what is going to sustain you through it. And what I mean by that is, if you feel like you have to be a different person, or you have to do things differently in an education space, and then you stay there for 11 years, like, how lonely will you feel? And I hear a lot of people, even academics now, tell me that they still feel like an imposter, like they, you know, like, should they even really be there? And I think part of that is because of comfort. They don't feel comfortable, you know, in that environment. And one of the ways for us to feel comfortable is to, you know, have more people around us that think and, you know, do the similar things, but also feel confident in who we are as a Pacifica person, so that if we do go to spaces, which will eventually happen, I mean, we are, you know, still a minority in this country, we're okay, like, we can contribute. And so I think bringing our cultural, you know, our cultural hat is part of our contribution to whatever space we come into. I mean, we already look different on the outside. We might as well bring what is different about us to the conversation, and even, you know, to the space, because it just adds to a different level of richness. And I don't think we have been given the space enough to do that in academic spaces. And I think, you know, people like Professor Unaisi, and there's many professors out there that are doing this, they are opening the space so that people like me and people after me feel more confident to write about who they are and why, you know, why they practice things differently and the value that practice does bring to the conversation. And the more we open up space, the more we write about who we are, the more we encourage other people to come in, the more comfortable we will all feel. And I think the more relevant our contribution will be to our Pacific communities, because I think sometimes at the moment our non-Pacific ways of doing it, which is what dominates, you know, tertiary institutions, is not really serving our communities very well. So we, I think, as a Pacific, you know, community, as Pacific academics, as Pacific researchers, we, you know, we have a role to play in making sure that what we're doing at a university is actually relevant to the communities that we then go out and serve.
I love that mindset. I love that mindset. And recently that's been my mindset around business. It's like, I got into business because, yes, I want to have some sort of purpose and give back. But really it was going in to be like, cool, how can I provide for my family? What's, you know, how can I make money? But now my mindset's kind of evolved. And it's like, what can I do to help give back to my community? This business has to give back. And I love that insight around, if you're going into university, have that end in mind, like, you know, how is this going to contribute to my community in the future? I love that. Look, Ite, there's so much that we could talk about on this, and we could talk for days. Honestly, I'm here and I've got like 100 more questions I want to ask you, and I wish, but maybe there's a part 2, who knows? But look, if there's one key takeaway that you want our listeners to take away from our conversation, what would that be?
What I would say is, anything is possible. You know, it's not too late to, if you're on a path where you don't think, you know, that this is where you want to end up, there's nothing stopping you from going to university, doing a PhD. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. And I also want to say that I haven't just come here by myself. Like, I've got a very, very supportive family who you know, pick up the pieces, who cook pots of curry for my talanoa sessions, who, you know, will connect me to people. I have a very, very strong support network. So anything is possible. Use your networks, you know, lean into people that love you. Surround yourselves with people who love you. And, you know, the sky is the limit. My mother always says, you know, reach for the stars, you know, you go girl. Like, and it used to sound silly when I was little, but actually sometimes, you know, that's just the encouragement I need. And so I'm very grateful. I'm very, very grateful for the support I have, because it has made me you know, feel like anything is possible. So don't give up. Don't give up. Come to university, you know, I'll be the first one cheering everyone on. And it's definitely worthwhile. It's enriched my life in so many different ways, and my family's. So yeah, don't give up.
Don't give up. Beautiful last words of advice for our listeners. Thank you again so much, Dr. Cammock, for the work that you do for our Pacifica community. Keep up the great work and all the best. Thank you.